it really started off kind of silly. I was posting like outfits of the day, and I don't even have like the best fashion ever, so I don't even know how that came about. But it started like generating a bit of traction. And I was like, okay, I could maybe take this somewhere. And at this point, I obviously knew that I wanted to be in sports reporting. I wanted to be in sports media, the sports industry as a whole. So I said, okay, I'm going to use this to my advantage.
Welcome to episode 138 of The Route, presented by White Whale Marketing. The Route is a glorified sports business coffee chat that is a new guest every episode as they share their experiences and route in sports. As always, I'm Christopher Nascimento, and let's get started. Before we begin, just a couple of things to cover. First off, if you haven't already, if you're watching us on YouTube, you can see here at the top hand corner, it says The Route. Underneath that, it says at The Route Sports. That is our handle on all social media platforms, whether it's TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, even have Facebook, but most importantly for the people listening, LinkedIn. So that's kind of a unique feature compared to maybe some other podcasts, but considering what we're discussing, the people that are on the podcast, that's the best platform, I'd say. So you can check us out there at The Route Sports. It's a great way for you to maintain your network, grow your network, expand it, start it, etc. Connect with me, the guest, or those people engaging with the post. So check us out there at The Route Sports on all platforms. You'll see when the episodes release, maybe a little tidbit about who the guest is that week, and also just clips. So other than LinkedIn, every other platform that we have just shares little tidbits and insights that week's guest shared. So check us out there at The Route Sports. And as I mentioned just at the beginning of that, we are on video too, and that's on YouTube underneath the White Whale Marketing YouTube channel. So it's White Whale MKTG. And then we have the Route playlist there where the last 60, 80 episodes that have been on video are available there. And you kind of just go through each one that you're interested in. And we also then just have clips there as well. And then if you're not interested in doing video, you can listen via audio. I believe we're on 8 to 10 podcast platforms, all the big ones, Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify, whatever, we're there. So check us out. And while you're there, don't forget to follow, subscribe, rate 5 stars because it allows the podcast just to grow a little bit easier. So with that now said, we can get into today's guest. I'd now like to welcome someone who's fit a ton of experience in a short amount of time. From assisting in sports broadcasting for teams and networks, working at the world stage for soccer for the Qatar 2022 World Cup, numerous multimedia endeavors, including TikTok University now, and now being the president of the University of Toronto Sports Business Club and story editor for SportsCentre at TSN. Emmy Curtis, welcome to The Route. How's it going?
Thank you so much. I'm good. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. I'm excited to get into your route. As I said just in this intro, there's so many kind of crazy things that you've already done that I'd love to kind of hear more about. So with that said, as every other episode, the last 137 have gone, take me through your route. So where did you start to get into the sports business space? And then how did you get all these different experiences already at such a young age?
Yeah, well, for me, it really started in high school. I loved theater. I loved public speaking. I was also an athlete. I played a ton of basketball. And my dad is a huge sports fan. And so I was just always around sports. I was always around broadcasting, whether I was playing or I was doing broadcasting club in high school. It was kind of just my passion. And so one day I was watching the Super Bowl with my dad and I saw Erin Andrews on the couch and I was like, oh my gosh, that's it. Like, I want to be her. It was this like perfect combination of the theater and the broadcasting aspect that I love, and also just me being an athlete and me always being around sports. And so my two kind of passions got to collide into this profession that I was like, wow, I know I would do great at this. I know that this is something that I would want to do for the rest of my life. So I'm pretty lucky that I kind of made that realization pretty early on in life. I figured it out kind of in high school. I joined the broadcasting club. And so I started getting reps pretty early. And yeah, like my mom is kind of this boss woman. She's a total girl boss. And so she's always just kind of been my right-hand man, and she's always kind of been like, you can go after whatever career you want to go after. And so it really started there. And I got my first kind of volunteer position in sports with the Fraser Valley Bandits of the CEBL League. They're now the Vancouver Bandits, but at the time they were Fraser Valley, and they were just down the street from where I lived. And so that was my first shot in sports. I was a broadcast assistant for the Bandits. I did that for a few seasons. Got a couple of, it's all about making connections for me. Every time I have this, like a new opportunity or new experience, I always just really focus on making connections and expanding my network. So from there, I got to be a sideline reporter for the Abbotsford Pilots, which honestly, I think I was way too young to do and not experienced enough, but it was a really great opportunity. And then I moved to Toronto for school. And I mean, there's a ton of different branches that I've got out of moving to Toronto and through school and through different jobs I've had. But yeah, since I moved to Toronto, everything really just started to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, as you said there, once you get into LinkedIn right after that first experience kind of just takes off in regards to everything you were then doing. So I guess then kind of going back to the beginning of it all, right, and then we'll work our way through it again. You were saying you saw Aaron Andrews during the Super Bowl and that kind of just clicked. Was there ever any, maybe before that, was it like, hey, maybe I'm going to become an engineer? Or then once you saw that, everything switched? Or were you then kind of already deciding and that was kind of the first time you realized, hey, this is what I want to do?
I think like for a lot of young people, you want to be a movie star. I think that was like kind of my first dream as a young child. I did a lot of acting. My mom put me in theater. And so my first kind of dream was to walk that red carpet and to be this movie star. And then once I started to get a little bit older and realized that I probably wasn't going to be a movie star, and that I wasn't actually that great at acting, I just, found that passion for sports broadcasting.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I know for myself, when you look at my kindergarten yearbook, it says soccer player. I thought it was going to be, the next Figo. And then by the time I think I was in grade 6, it said accountant. So real fast, I realized, hey, I'm not going to be one of the best soccer players in the world. So no, that's funny how that ends up working. And I guess as that kind of gone on, once you then had, let's say, that epiphany that, hey, I want to do what Aaron Andrews does, was it then you decided, hey, let me go try for the Fraser Valley Bandits? And I know you said the Abbotsford Pilots as well. Like, hey, let me just try to see if I like this and maybe it's something I'd want, or is that no, hey, I need to get that experience and kind of get started now?
I think I don't really think that I ever even thought of am I gonna like this once I'm actually doing it. I don't think my brain ever went there. I think it was just like oh my gosh, this is perfect. This looks, the idea that I created in my head of what this career was going to look like just seemed so perfect to me that I don't even think any other thoughts came into my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But when I did have that, I'll never forget it. The first time I walked into Abbotsford Centre for the first Fraser Valley Bandits game, and I wasn't on camera or anything, I was just assisting with the team. I just knew, I was like, I love this. This is going to be great.
Yeah. And kind of building on that too, right? You're talking about that time with Fraser Valley, but then Abbotsford as well. I think when you were sharing it initially, like, hey, I was way too young to be doing the pilot's job. How old were you, and then what did it entail as well?
I think I was 16 or 17, and it was through a connection that I had made with the Bandits in the first season. And the guy said, yeah, like come do a couple of reps with the Pilots. You can do interviews in between the periods. It'll be really great to kickstart your career. And I was just like, yeah, let's do it. And I just remember the first game, absolutely terrified, had no experience really as a reporter. Again, I was kind of doing some broadcasting club at my high school, but it wasn't really legit. It was just casual. And then so to be in the PJHL as a reporter at 16 or 17 with no reporting experience was a bit of a wake-up call, but it did give me that initial wake-up call of, okay, this is serious. These are kind of the steps that you have to take each game in order to interview a player and to get good audio. And this is what a broadcast team looks like and all the people involved. I think at a young age really did open my eyes to what the industry looked like.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess before we move on to your jump to Toronto, do you find, or would you even recommend, let's say we have, sometimes I've received messages or, connected with people in high school that listen to the podcast too. And then we also have executives. So it's a varying degree of people that listen to it. But let's say for those that are maybe a little bit younger, about to be going to university or in university, do you recommend, let's say at high school, maybe jumping right into the deep end and getting that experience? Or is that something, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, for sure. Like I'm all here for get involved in elementary school if you
Yeah.
have that opportunity. I think that one of the biggest positives from my career so far is that I got started early because I got to gain all this experience at a young age so that when I started to apply to something like the TSN job, I had all this experience at a young age, and so employers looked at that like, wow, she knows what she wants to do, she's passionate about it, she's clearly chasing her goals.
Mm-hmm.
Let's give her a shot. Like when I first, and I guess we'll kind of get into it, but when I first
Mm-hmm.
started at TSN, I was doing a lot of production work and I had zero production experience, none, like absolutely
Yeah.
zero. But I think my boss looked at my resume and saw, okay, she can work hard and she's got the passion for it. She's got all
Mm-hmm.
these things. Let's give her a shot. Maybe we can mold her into what we want.
Yeah, no, for sure. I guess as you're kind of touching on there and maybe hinting at it where we're going to get into a bit later on, but what was that jump like? Obviously, it's probably for university, I'd assume, and that's why you then moved to Toronto. But once you kind of got into obviously the biggest city in Canada, let's say the sports mecca of the country too, how did you then capitalize on this new opportunity, right? You have an open, sea, let's say, of opportunities there in Toronto with sports business. How did it take off and what were your first moves? So then maybe people listening will be like, if I move to Toronto, maybe I could do something similar.
Yeah, well, I was really nervous because I don't come from a big city. I'm from a suburb way outside of Vancouver.
Okay.
And so I was a little bit nervous moving to the big city, kind of unlimited options. You can kind of direct your career in so many different ways. And so I knew that when I moved to Toronto, I was going to have to start really building a network because I had no connections here. I actually had no friends when I first moved
Mm-hmm.
here. I was literally coming here at basically net zero, starting fresh, which definitely had its pros and cons. But I knew that my number one step was to start building my network because that was very important for me back home in BC. And so I knew that it was going to be a big thing for me here. And so I did move here because of university. And so
Yeah.
the first sports, I guess, club that I joined here was U of T Sports Business, which
Mm-hmm.
is really cool to see how I've evolved through my time with the club. But that was my first opportunity to network with other people in sports. And that was my main goal. And one of the big things that I noticed when I first moved here was that Canada was doing really well and they might qualify for a FIFA World Cup. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, I was like, wow, that's the jackpot. Like I've hit the jackpot. Canada is going to have qualifying matches in Toronto. I have to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So I sent like a million messages on LinkedIn, and honestly, I didn't get a single reply. I think they were like, "Who is this girl from Abbotsford, and what is she doing?" And then I was like, you know what? I'll just send Canada Soccer a direct message on Instagram. Like I'm desperate at this point. I got a response in the first 5 minutes with an email
Wow.
saying, "Hey, contact this person," and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing." And so I sent the email off and he said, "Yeah, we'd love you to volunteer for the qualifying matches." And that's where I honestly hit the jackpot because I was meeting reporters, I was meeting coaches, I was meeting players, sports management students. It was the hub of networking for me in Toronto. And that eventually led to me going to the World Cup and my internship at TSN.
Yeah, and I think just what you're saying there is kind of a great, let's say, key or maybe a takeaway, right, for maybe people in university or those kind of starting off of just keep shooting, right? Like I know sometimes for the podcast, we were like, hey, how'd you get that CEO or someone on the podcast? I was like, oh, I just sent them a message on LinkedIn, similar how we got connected, right? Where, shoot or shoot, let's say, is how people say it. So then
Absolutely.
obviously I wouldn't have even expected, right? You're saying you're shooting everyone messages on LinkedIn, nothing, and then shooting them an Instagram DM to, the whole page. Then that's how it goes on from there. So kind of a cool little insight from that standpoint. Obviously, as you said, you then volunteer, you begin meeting a ton of people, especially at this volunteer, and it led to your FIFA World Cup experience. So how did that transition? Was it someone you actually met on that first day? Someone that you met through the different qualifiers? How did it kind of build on from there?
Yeah, so there was a lot of downtime in the broadcasting area where when teams go onto the pitch to go through their plays and things that they don't want to be broadcasted, the whole like reporter and broadcast teams are pulled away from the pitch. And so there's a lot of downtime, and that's where all the reporters kind of chat and they kind of all know each other because they've seen each other at past sporting experiences and maybe they're friends, whatever it is. And I knew this was my time to shine. Like we're all in one room. I'm just running around talking to as many people as I could. And I bumped into this guy who worked for FIFA, and we were just kind of chatting. And I was like, "Yeah, I know that there's a World Cup coming up. Do you know of any opportunities available? Like, I'd love to apply." And he said, "There's no job opportunities for someone maybe at your age with your kind of experience, but you should definitely apply to volunteer." And so I was like, okay, that sounds kind of cool. But then I'm talking about paying for a lot of things. Like now we're talking about accommodation and transportation, and the costs kind of start to build up.
Yeah.
And so I applied and I was like, you know what? Like maybe I'll just go through the interview phase and just see how it works. Cause that's another tip that I give to young people is apply to everything. Even if you know like you probably wouldn't say yes, at least go through the application process so that you can meet maybe future employers. So I went through the application process and I was like, wow, this looks like a really, really cool opportunity. But I was still like unsure. And then I remember I went for like a run one morning, and then I decided to like open my email like at the end of my run, which like I usually don't do. I don't know, like there was just this like the instinct to check my email. And I checked my email and I have this email from FIFA and it says, "We'd like you to come as a team leader." And I was like, this is
Wow.
insane. And I called my mom and I was like, oh my gosh, FIFA wants me to be a team leader in media operations. This is crazy. And so that's kind of how it went on. Is I started off by thinking that I was going to be just a little volunteer, and then I got asked if I wanted to be a leader, and that's kind of how my journey to Qatar started.
Yeah. And then do you mind maybe building on that too? Because I know initially when you're talking about it, you're like, hey, like, I don't know, there'd be a lot to take on, then go to Qatar, etc. How did that then look? Did you actually end up physically going to the World Cup there in Qatar? And what did that process look like? Especially because, as you're saying, you're in school, you're part of the U of T, you have all these other things going on as well. So how did that look?
Yeah, well, I did go to Qatar for the World Cup. There was a lot of prior preparation that was had before I actually left. I was still working at TSN, obviously still in school, a bunch of other things going on. But I think the best thing about the people that I work with is everyone is very understanding. And I think everyone knows that I'm kind of a go-getter and I love to do it all. Like I think that's one big thing about my career is I know I want to be a sports reporter, but I love sports business. I love being a floor director. Like I just love social media. I love it all. So I think people at this point are just kind of used to me doing a bunch of things. And so I had to go to my boss and I did say like, hey, are you going to be okay if I take a month or two off of work to go and work World Cup? Same with school. I think TSN was very like, yes, go. We'll give you the time off of work, which I'm very thankful for. It was trickier with school because we're not in the COVID time now where all my classes are online. They're all in person. And so that was very challenging. And I tried to keep up with classes while I was in Qatar, but then there were some issues like getting onto different like internet services and emails. And so it was a lot of work when I got back from World Cup and a lot of catching up. And it was definitely a challenge, but I spent quite a few long nights catching up and getting back into the flow of it, and everything worked out in the end, but it was definitely a time management challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe before we move on from your experience here, sorry, I forgot to put myself on screen. That's part of it. But building on from that, what was it like maybe in Qatar, right? Because obviously that's quite a unique experience. And then maybe too, you can then build on some other things like how did you get your job at TSN and kind of building on from those experiences from there.
Yeah, Qatar was, I think it was a bit of a shock for me. It's a very different country than
Yeah.
Canada. And I was also arriving there solo. Like I flew
Yes.
from Toronto to Doha by myself. I had like 3 layovers. It was like the biggest trip that
Wow.
I've ever taken alone.
Mhm.
And so there was a lot of kind of stress and anxiety in the lead up to being in Qatar. And then once I got there, I just felt like I'd made up all these kind of stereotypes of what the country was going to be like in my head. And then when I got there, I was like, this is great. Like everyone is so inviting, everyone is so kind, everyone is so excited because of the World Cup. Their hospitality is amazing. Like everyone wants to help you out and direct you on where to go if you're lost. Everyone has their different experiences, but for me, it was pretty positive. I lived in this kind of gated off area with all the volunteers and all the staff. And so it was really this just hub of
Mhm.
like little condos, I guess. And so at night, like people would be playing football in the streets or people would be running around with their flags. We had different nights, like country themed nights. And so it was just this really cool experience to be in that hub of people who were just so passionate about sport and passionate about being involved. Everyone was very like-minded. And then of course, like World Cup itself was unreal. Like actually working at those games was a feeling that I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to match ever again.
Yeah. No, I'm sure that must have been crazy. And were you going to other locations, or was it specifically just in Doha?
It was in Doha, so I was managing the team at the Al Thumama Stadium. There was 8 different stadiums, so I was just at the one. I did get to watch Canada play in my stadium once, so that was pretty cool. But yeah, it was centered just in Doha.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I guess kind of building on from that, once you return, obviously you're coming off this high of, working the World Cup. So then how did you maybe get back into the swing of things within Toronto? Were there other opportunities that you then explored, and how did those opportunities come about following that amazing experience?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think after you get to say, "Hey, I've worked a World Cup" on your resume, I think that's a big selling point and obviously like one of the coolest things I've got to do in my career so far. But I just jumped back into TSN. I was also still in school. I had literally finals week the week I got back, and so I think my main focus was to get back into the flow of things at my job with TSN, and then obviously make sure that I was in check for all my classes so that I could do well in finals week. So I think I kind of went back to my roots and my foundation here in Toronto when I got back, taking that experience that I learned from the World Cup and implementing it into my day-to-day roles. I think
Hmm.
that's one thing that I really encourage people to do is you don't need to have these experiences and then just use that experience for other experiences. You
Hmm.
can use it in your day-to-day life. Like I feel like I learned so much about leadership and
Yeah.
communication and all these different things that I feel like they changed me as a person.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And as you're kind of saying that, I just even realized we never even really got into why you picked the University of Toronto and what you're studying. So do you mind maybe filling in the gap, and then we'll kind of take it back from there?
Yeah, well, I think that I was I'm from BC originally,
Hmm.
and my initial dream was to go to Syracuse University because they have this
Nice.
sports broadcasting program that is top tier. And so my as soon as I joined broadcasting club in high school, I knew I wanted to go to Syracuse. It was my big dream. I was talking to all the admissions people, making sure that they knew who I was. And then I got accepted, and I was like, "Wow, this is amazing! Like, I'm going to New York.
Hmm.
This my dream has come true." Then they offered me a half ride scholarship,
Wow.
and if you're an international student, you know the kind of money that a half ride scholarship is, especially if you're going down to the states. And so in my mind, I built up this. Well, there's no way that I say no to that. Like,
Yeah.
this is like hundreds of thousands of dollars that they've just given to me, basically.
Hmm.
And so my brain was so stuck on I've made it, like I've done it, I'm goal complete.
Yeah.
And what I didn't think about was that even though you have a half ride scholarship, you still have to pay for that other half. And because I don't have like dual citizenship or anything, the
Hmm.
international student fees are just like most people, you can't afford that. And so I had to make that like super tough call, and I had to decline my scholarship because I just couldn't afford that kind of money for the other half. And so at this point, I had very limited time to apply to Canadian universities. And so I hadn't done a lot of preparation. I hadn't looked into very many schools. I just knew that I'd heard of U of T. I knew that they had a good
Yeah.
journalism program. It wasn't sports, but I figured, okay, it'll still be the same foundation. Sounds good. And so I think that that's kind of one of the mistakes I made early on in my career, is that I should have focused more and done more research on what schools were available for my career and the path that I was going down. I love being at U of T. It's a great program. I've learned a lot, but I think that for me, I could have gone to like maybe a sport media program or a broadcasting program specifically.
Yeah.
I think that that's one thing that I would maybe change, but U of T is fantastic. I've had great experiences. I think another positive about me being at U of T, which isn't predominantly a sports school, I think it's starting to grow now, but there's been lots of opportunities for me because no one else really does sports or does sports media. It's very science based, academics based, and
Yeah.
so there's not a lot of interest there. Whereas if you went to maybe a TMU for sport media, there'd be a lot more interest and a lot more people
Yeah.
going for those positions.
Yeah, that actually makes a ton of sense. And even just kind of, what is it? Not just being so specific within a niche as well, right? You're learning about journalism as a whole rather than just sports journalism. And honestly, once you just apply your passion to it, then you can, just bring it anywhere. But I think that's kind of a cool thing that you mentioned there as well. So definitely makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
And I guess what you're then just saying there too, I guess almost to sum it up, it's almost like not putting all your eggs in one basket, right? Where I know I've listened to a podcast and they're just talking about, hey, how often does things go to plan, right? Whether it's you buying something, whether it's you, making dinner, right? And the rice over cooking like me last night, or, different things like that. But I think kind of what you're just sharing there, it's almost more so, being prepared, seeing what's out there, and then kind of going from there. So I think that's kind of a great insight for those listening as well.
Sure.
And I guess just building on that too, and then maybe just updating where you're currently at. So let's say someone visits you on LinkedIn, Emmy Curtis, right? Following the World Cup, there's a ton of different experience that's taken place since, right? Like if I'm looking here, there's the double IHF, there's Director of Communications at University of Toronto Women in Sport, your own podcast, sports writer, U of T, varsity publications, TikTok University, right? There's so many different things that's taken place. So do you mind maybe filling in the gap and explain some of those different experiences that you have there too?
Yeah, totally. I think that I kind of said like my foundation is always TSN. That's always who my kind of main man is. But anytime that opportunities pop up that I think, wow, that would be a great experience, I go for it. Like I saw that the Women's World Championships for the International Federation of Hockey was coming to Brampton. And I was like, okay, yes, I need to be there. It was also a TSN broadcast. So again, they gave me some time off to go do the Women's Worlds because obviously it's kind of hand in hand with working alongside them. And yeah, I got to be a floor director at the Women's World Championships, which is a great thing to put on my resume because I think, again, when you try to go to employers and say, hey, I want to be a reporter, I want to be a broadcaster, there's a lot of behind the scenes people who go into you being a reporter. And so by being a floor director, I was able to work with like the in-game host and different reporters on giving them their cues, their timing, scripting, having cameramen in the right positions, etc. It's all the different things that play into actually having a full broadcast. So to understand all those behind the scenes actions, I think really gives you the full package so that when you do go into that reporter job, you have a very broad view of everything that encompasses your role. I know that I have Hoop Queens on my resume now. It's the first paid women's basketball league in Canada. It's really cool. They started last season. I kind of just did some of my own work with them. Like I filmed some TikToks. But this year I'm actually going to be helping their social media team, which is I'm super pumped for. That'll be starting up in the next couple weeks. It's a great league. The players are awesome. The founder is awesome. Everyone is just that. The whole Hoop Queens team is is really inspiring. And I think that that's a big step for women's basketball in Toronto, especially with the talks of potentially a WNBA team coming to the city. Then I try to do as much as I can for U of T, try to give back. I did women in sport last year. Won't be doing that this year, but that was also a big opportunity for me. Getting to work with other females at U of T who were interested in sports was really cool. TikTok. I also do a lot of TikTok. TikTok University is new. It's this new kind of classes that teach you how to make good content and lighting and audio and a bunch of behind the scenes thing on putting content together. So I'm just up to a bunch of different things. And I think that I just kind of jump at every opportunity possible. And when that's done, it's done. And then I hop back to TSN and then I jump to the next thing and then back to TSN. I think that that's just how my career has gone so far.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, right, TSN is your foundation. It's that main point. It's almost like a spoke, right? You always come back to TSN, but then you're always kind of creating these different spokes to the wheel. So, no, very cool. One of the things I was kind of interested in too, just looking at your LinkedIn, the TikTok University, or even just TikTok as a whole, because I know there's kind of different notches there. What does that entail, right? How did that come about? How are you doing TikTok University? I think TikTok, you have 28,000 followers, which is pretty impressive. So do you mind maybe sharing a bit more about that?
Well, I started posting on TikTok in grade 12, I think, more so first year university, started taking it a bit more seriously. It really started off kind of silly. I was posting like outfits of the day, and I don't even have like the best fashion ever, so I don't even know how that came about. But it started like generating a bit of traction. And I was like, okay, I could maybe take this somewhere. And at this point, I obviously knew that I wanted to be in sports reporting. I wanted to be in sports media, the sports industry as a whole. So I said, okay, I'm going to use this to my advantage. And so I started kind of altering my content to be more sports niche, sports media niche. And it's been great for me so far. I've built this kind of community on the app that I think has been really good. I get to meet a lot of, especially women in the industry, I think is kind of the coolest part. Like I've met people through TikTok that live in the States or wherever in Canada. And I've got to like meet up with them at different events now. So I think that that's really cool. It's almost like LinkedIn for me in a way, because I altered my content to be so niche, I've got to connect with so many different sports people. And then TikTok Canada reached out to me after kind of my first year on the app. I think I was at like 12K followers, like nothing drastic. And they said, hey, we love your content. We'd love you to join the community creator team as a sports and fitness content creator. So basically, like I post content through my social media and through my own personal TikTok account, but they kind of give me tips and invite me to different events and kind of just follow my journey and support my journey. And like my account totally crashed once. And so I called them and they had like a support team that brought my account back up immediately. So they're kind of just this support system in a way for your account. And now I'm with TikTok North America, which is really cool. And then obviously that eventually led to TikTok University. So TikTok basically just supports your platform and your content creation journey and gives you tips and different things along the way to help you out.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. Must be like so much things you're able to learn, especially from the platform themselves. So that's awesome. And I guess one of the things we've kind of talked about throughout this whole podcast so far is TSN, right? We always kind of referred back to it, but never really got into it. So how did that role come about, and what are you doing there too?
Yeah, so that role came about again, the Canada Soccer qualifiers, when I went to volunteer. I met a TSN reporter, and again, kind of like the FIFA position, I just started chatting, and I knew I wanted to get an internship early. This was in my second year of university, so last summer, I knew that I wanted to try and find an internship. I didn't want to work at Starbucks. Like my first job ever was at Starbucks. And so I knew that I really wanted to keep a sports job. I felt like I had enough experience now to work for a sports team or a sports company throughout the summer. And so that was kind of my goal. And so I knew that finding an internship would be very important. And so I met the TSN reporter. We started chatting. I said, hey, do you know if TSN has any internships? Because I checked their website a million times because TSN is like my dream company. Like I wanted to work there since I knew I wanted to be a reporter. And it always says like no internships available. Please continue to check, or whatever the website says. I don't think they've updated that page in years. Because he was like, I don't know if we have any available, but I'll give you this email. You can contact him and he can help you out. So again, I get this email. I followed up with this guy, and he said, yeah, like we're going to take a few interns this year. We're going to take 3 or 4. I'd love to have you for an interview and we can have a chat. And so I must have been on this like 1-hour phone call with my now boss. Absolutely terrified. Like I was so nervous. I wasn't sure what kind of questions he was going to ask me. And I knew that like TSN was going to be a big deal for me. But it all ended up being okay. I got the internship. And so I basically do the same role that I did during my internship, except now I'm actually working for the company. But yeah, I'm a story editor on SportsCentre, which is one of the main shows that TSN has on their networks. And I build highlight packs. So if you've ever watched SportsCentre and you watch the different games that are played throughout the day, I basically put those little packs together, and that's my job. It's really fun. I love it. It's been the best way to kind of get my foot in the door. And yeah, we'll see how my career at TSN kind of starts to evolve, but that's where I am now, and I'm really, really enjoying it.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And yeah, there's so much things we were able to cover so far in the podcast. And I guess before we wrap it up, I like to ask every guest 2 questions at the end just to bring it all together. So obviously we talked about everything to date, and then I like to bring up this, let's call it the rocking chair moment. I always like to say throughout all these episodes, I'm going to live until I'm 103. I'm going to be on a rocking chair thinking about all the cool things I've been able to do throughout my career. Let's say Emmy's in the same position, right? You're 103 on a rocking chair, thinking back to all the different things you've been able to do throughout your career so far, right? What is one maybe story that's going to stand out that you're going to be able to remember at 103 on that rocking chair?
Wow. Okay. I really like this question. There's a few little things that come to mind. I think one of the coolest moments for me to date is when I was at the World Cup, obviously working a leadership role. The public was watching me a lot, and like to word this properly, in their country, they don't see a lot of female leaders. And so for me to go in there and have a team of a lot of like Qatari nationals, a lot of women, actually, I think like I had this one mom come up to me and in the middle of a game, and she just said, wow, like you are so inspiring. You're so young and you're just commanding the room, and people obviously really respect you, and your leadership looks so strong. She was just like, it's amazing to see. We don't get to see that a lot in our country. And so she just gave me a hug, and I think that it was such kind of a small moment, but for me, I was like, oh my gosh, like women are looking at me in this country as like, wow, like I can be her too. And I think that was really just a moment for me that was like, wow, I love what I do, and to be able to be that person for other women in a country that doesn't get to see that very often, I think was just a really special moment for me.
Yeah, no, that's an unreal story and kind of very cool, just in the grand scheme of things, right? Obviously talking about, working the World Cup, TSN, all these different things, but then it's a little deeper than that sometimes, right? So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then obviously we went into the future, 103-year-old Emmy. Let's go back to 16-year-old when you're about to do, the Fraser Valley job for the first time, or maybe it's when you realized you wanted to be a sports reporter like Erin Andrews. What's one thing you've learned to date that if you could go back in time, let's say through a time machine, talk to a younger version of yourself, what's one thing you've learned so far? You're like, hey, younger version Emmy, this is what you should know. This is something that I think has been a key that I've learned so far.
Yeah, well, off the top, just biggest tip ever is networking is so important. But the thing for me is that my mom always says that prior preparation prevents piss poor performance.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's the biggest piece of advice ever. Prior preparation is so important. Even when you don't think you need to prepare. Like one thing that pops into my mind is that a couple months ago, actually, in my journalism class, we had this assignment where we were told to go to the Toronto International Film Festival and do street interviews where you go up to random people in the streets. And I was like, oh, this will be a breeze. Like, no problem. Like, I'll make a couple of questions. I'll get my friend to record and I'll go do the interview. I was not prepared at all. I went out into the International Film Festival, and to my luck, the CEO of TIFF is like, I asked him to have an interview. I had no idea who he was. No idea. I just knew that everyone was kind of like talking to him and laughing and smiling. And I was like, oh, this guy seems cool. Like, whatever. And so I start interviewing him, and I really did not do a great job. Like, my interview wasn't like, for my standards, I really didn't think I did a great job. And then he was like starting to give me all these like pieces of advice. And he's like, this is how you should approach people. And this is how you should conduct the interview. And like, he was super kind about it. And I was like, okay, thank you, giving me all these tips. And then this guy came up to me after the interview, and he's like, do you know who that was? And I was like, no. And he's like, that was the CEO of TIFF. And I was
wow.
In that moment, my heart kind of sank, because I was like, that was stupid of me. Like, I wasn't prepared. I didn't do any research prior to going out and doing this assignment. I probably looked like an idiot. This isn't the standard of reporting that I want for myself. There was just a lot of things that I'm like, wow, if I had been prepared, if I had done my research, that could have been an amazing moment for me that I kind of bombed because I went into it too casual. So my biggest piece of advice is just always be prepared, even when you don't think you need to be prepared.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great piece of advice. And who knows, maybe we'll have that moment to kind of make up for that and have that redemption shot. So I'm sure it's going to come in regards with the CEO of TIFF. But yeah, no, this has been amazing, right? I think we've kind of covered a bunch of amazing things so far in your career. And obviously you've been able to kind of gain experience in a bunch of different areas as well, and even just still being a student. So that's really impressive. I know prior to recording, you're saying you're still in a semester, which is wild considering how much you're currently doing. But unless there's anything else you'd like to share, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, and thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's it for episode 138 of The Route. Stay tuned for next week's episode.